Won- Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taylor. I am very happy for everyone joining us today. And yeah, we're going to be talking about student trauma. So let me go ahead and get my screen set up. Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yep, thank you. All right, so let's dive in. So as Taylor said, my name is Brian Wimmer. I'm the Learning Experiences Coordinator with MeTEOR Education. I actually come from the classroom myself. I was previously an intervention specialist in a 3rd through 5th grade classroom, working with students who had emotional and behavioral disability diagnoses. And I also worked as a co-teacher in a mix of preschool settings, from changing diapers up to getting kids ready to head off to kindergarten. So if there's anything you need from me, you can see my email here, bwimmer@MeTEOR Education. So to know a little bit more about who is with us today, I want to do a temperature check. And this is sort of something I would do with my students as well. So if you could please pull up the chat box on your screen and type in there, how are you feeling today? Are you a bit hyper? Are you feeling content, distracted, upset, hungry, or sad? So what is going on? We got somebody who's feeling content. I like that. I know we're starting to come back from our summer break. A bit distracted, a bit hungry. Okay. Content. Nice. Well, ready to go, energetic, distracted. I know there's a lot happening as we come back, but today we're going to be talking about some heavier topics, but some things that I think
Go to
really
your
make
bed.
a difference in can really make a big difference in these students' lives, our students who have faced trauma. So let's get ourselves in the right headspace. So let's take just a second, go ahead and watch the center of the screen and just feel where you feel your breath in your body. So let's calm ourselves before we dive into this. So do you feel your breath in your chest? Maybe in your stomach? So hopefully we are feeling a bit ready. If we were distracted, maybe we're coming around. But I want to start because, as we know, coming out of last year, and you know better than anyone, there's no bandage that's big enough to address what our students have been going through and what we've all gone through. But I think Mr. Rogers put this really well when he said, anything that is human is mentionable, and then anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we're not alone. And it's really important to keep this in mind as we're working with our students in trauma, that helping them feel comfortable and trusting us to talk about it is one of the first big steps to helping these kids. So let's just take a look at what some of the data shows us about California. So we're looking at data from 2017 to 2019 that's collected on depression-related feelings in students in 7th grade on the left and 9th grade on the right. You'll notice in both of these, statewide, we're seeing about a third of our students that were reporting depression-related feelings. And this is, like I said, 2019, pre-pandemic. 11th grade over here, we see this jumps up as these kids are getting ready to head out to college. Their depression-related feelings are close to 37%, and our non-traditional is still right there at a third. So this is a significant population of our students. And as we look how those feelings turn into actual mental health crises, Over 2002 to 2019, we've seen a slight increase in our children 5 to 14 in hospitalizations, just about 2.5 hospitalizations per 1,000 kids. But look at this jump, just about 25% jump in our kids 15 to 19. So we're seeing nearly 10 out of 1,000 students being hospitalized on an annual basis right now in California. So looking at the population I worked with and the kids here, like this is something that's facing all of us. 1 in 6 children ages 2 to 8 has a mental behavioral developmental disorder, the CDC has shared. And this is only affected worse by age and poverty. So the younger and the poorer our students are, the less access they will have to services. One of the most difficult days I ever had as a teacher was actually one of my very first days on the job. I got called into the district office to do a parent an IEP meeting. And what it was, this mother of 2 twin boys that were in 4th grade, one of them had severe behavioral emotional issues. And the only thing the mother could do at this point to get her son the services she needed that the state offered was sign over custody of one of her children, one of her twin boys, to the state to be taken to a facility 2 hours away. She couldn't get those services unless he was a ward of the state because there's so little available to children, especially below the age of 12. So we are one of the first lines of defense. For children living under poverty, we see 1 in 5 have diagnoses. And one of the most alarming stats that I found on the CDC is in 2017, suicide and homicide were the 2nd and 3rd causes in our 15 to 24-year-olds, and the 2nd and 5th causes in our 10 to 14-year-olds. So this is something that we need to address because, as the ACLU found in May, it's only gotten worse. So 1/4 of our students reported needing services before, and now 1/3 of them feel that they need them. Pre-pandemic, we saw that 65% of our students felt that they were doing really well mentally, and now that's down to 40%. So we've got a big burden coming our way. Now, that was a lot, and we need to catch our breath a little bit and trying to grasp what's coming back at us. So if you would please, I want to try something with us. If you would go and open a second browser window, an internet window, and go to www.menti.com, or actually I will put that in the chat to make everyone's lives even easier. So www.menti.com. Oh, did that not work? Let me try this. And what we're gonna do is a little interactive game here. So let me put this in the chat, copy, there you go. So that should take you right to it, and then it'll look like that. So to help us clear our mind and refocus of a little bit of this, I want to try another activity that I used to do with my students and center us around a place that we find most peaceful. So if you go to menti.com and up at the top, this code 54241952, put that in, type in and submit, what is your peaceful place? Anybody? All right. In the mountains above the clouds. One of the ways that we can help our traumatized students is by giving them ways to help focus themselves on the lake, outdoors in nature, outdoors. It seems like we've got a bit of a theme here, the beach. Many of us, and it's just human instinct, the outdoors is one of our most calming places. There's actually a lot of research being done in Japan around using nature therapy for post-traumatic stress. So even so firefighters, first responders, they actually have retreats of walking through the woods, and they're finding that the what's given off by the trees, the oxygen, everything given off by the trees helps really lighten people's load. So how do we work the outdoors in? How do we help our students find these places of peace? One of the things I would do with my kids is they would all have a little picture of their peaceful place that we would keep by, so they could, when they needed to, take that and try and go calm themselves. So we'll talk about this a little more in a bit. Now, after you submit, you should look on a screen like this. Please hit the exit and vote on another presentation. We're going to use this a few more times today. So let's talk about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, because in 1995, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente did a huge study in California where they helped address 3 categories of ACEs: abuse, so physical, emotional, or sexual, neglect, and household dysfunctions. They found that in these 3 categories, children who experienced had experiences between the ages of 0 and 17 had much higher rates of drug use, of alcoholism, of poor outcomes without supportive interventions. Now we think this is maybe just a few percentage, 10, 15% of our students. But as we look at these 2 studies of adults, we're seeing similar things. And that is that 60% of adults, myself included, experience at least one ACE, one of those adverse childhood experiences. And 16, or 1 in 6 adults, 16%, have experienced 4 or more ACEs. So this is something pretty prevalent. A study in Washington looking at an average classroom of ACEs found and broke it down this way, that you'll see 1/3 of the average students in their class have 4 or more ACEs, and 80% of the class has at least 1. And we're seeing these rises nationwide. So it's something we need to be aware of, because we know that children that have at least a score of 4, without any interventions, without an adult that's able to support them and step in and give them the care that they need to see, they're over 4.5 times more likely to use drugs and 7.5 times more likely to be an alcoholic. So these are very startling issues that we're facing. So let's take a minute to pause as we really sort of put the whole issue into perspective. Are there any questions or ahas that anybody has that you want to put in the chat before we move forward? All right, well, feel free to put them in there at any point, and I will make sure to address them as soon as I can. So let's take a second and just see sort of what are these ACEs? What are we talking about here? So go ahead and let's read through this and take account of how many of these you may have experienced. Keep that number in your head of how many. And let's read through this slide real quick. So have you been in foster care, experienced harassment or bullying at school, lived with a parent or guardian who passed away, have been separated from your primary caregiver through deportation or immigration, have had a serious medical procedure or life-threatening illness, have often seen or heard violence in your neighborhood or your school neighborhood, you have been detained, arrested, incarcerated, Have you often been treated badly because of your race, sexual orientation, or place of birth, or experienced verbal or physical abuse from a partner? Okay. So this is completely anonymous, as we saw last time. If you're willing, please go ahead and type in the new code. And if you would share with us to see sort of what does the makeup of our group look like? How many ACEs do we see? Four more, one. So as we see, even with the small sample size that we have here, this is something that is much more prevalent than many of us realized, I believe. I know it's more prevalent than I realized before I really got working in this side of things. So I love this quote. We see the world through the lens of all our experiences. That is a fundamental part of the human condition. And I think it's something, especially when we're in those moments with students, when they're in an active trauma situation or when they're being defiant, it's hard to remember that this experience, this moment is more than what's happening right now. This is what's happening at home. This is what happened a week ago. But why does this matter so much? Well, this is the trauma pyramid that's put out by the CDC, and it's looking at our lives from conception to death and how these ACEs, these traumatic experiences, truly do. They find people with 6 or more ACEs die nearly 20 years earlier than those without. And what they're seeing is that the historical trauma builds into the local situation, creating the adverse childhood experiences that disrupt the neurodevelopment, leaving students and people social, emotional, and cognitively impaired at higher risk of risky health behaviors, leading to disease and then early death. So how can we help? Well, one of the things that's come out recently is child parent psychotherapy, or CPP. It was developed by Dr. Alicia Lieberman at the University of California in San Francisco. And CPP is intergenerational counseling. It helps parents address their own histories, learn how to have healthy attachments with their children, and break that intergenerational cycle of trauma. Now, we are no counselors, and that's not what we're here to be. One of the things we can work on in classrooms is helping to share self-regulation practices such as mindfulness or meditation, using some of the check-in practices like the temperature check at the beginning. One of the things students need to understand is their feelings and being able to address them. I may think I'm angry, but I'm actually hungry, and that's what's making me angry. I may be scared, and that's what's making me stop, recede into myself. So helping students address those feelings is a big piece of this, and helping meditate, helping students make their fight or flight mechanism less sensitive. So self-regulation practices are a big thing we can bring into the classroom, and we'll go through a few more of those throughout the morning. Next is one we hear all the time: healthy diet and regular exercise. It is huge that our bodies are getting the foods that help us, and that we're exercising to get the good hormones flowing through us. Now, we're not asking everybody here to be an expert on CPP and therapy. There's people out there for you. But we're also hoping that none of us are leaving here with no awareness of childhood trauma and how we can address it in the school. As educators, we want to be routinely aware and moving towards highly aware when it's most necessary, okay? And now we have these things in our pockets to recommend to families, but they're not always there for us to share out. Sorry about that. So let's take a look at another strategy that worked really well with my students with a bit of coaching, and it's the STOP strategy. So the S is a bit on the nose, and it does stand for stop. Stop what you're doing for just a minute. It's a hard first step, and it's something we need to coach and practice to get kids to realize I need to stop. And we're just going to take a few deep breaths in through our nose, out through our mouth. Just 3 to 5 deep breaths, and then observe and be curious about the emotion or the feeling that we're having. And recognize that this feeling is not a permanent one. It wasn't here 5 minutes ago, and hopefully in 5 more minutes, we'll be back on track. And once we've had a second just to catch our breath, we need to proceed to an activity that's going to help us decompress. So maybe it's a couple of minutes with my picture of my most peaceful place. Maybe it's sitting on the pillow in the corner. Maybe it's listening to my one favorite song, but giving ourselves that small window of time to refocus, okay? So stop, take, observe, proceed. Trauma-informed educators recognize students' actions are a direct result of their life experiences. When their students act out or disengage, they don't ask them what is wrong with you, but rather what happened to you. And I know many of us have experienced this, right? Students who we know come from parents who are separated, and depending on which parent they stayed with, some days they may come in really frustrated, angry, tired. Maybe the day before when they're leaving, they're anxious going home. So we need to remember that this is more than what's happening in our room. But one of the things I don't know that we talk about enough when we talk about trauma is what's actually happening in our brain. So our brain is made up of 3 distinct layers, and neuroscience has made huge strides in recent years, helping us better understand these different structures of our brains and how they affect us and our learning and our interactions. So the first one in the center here, this red piece, is our reptilian brain. This part of our brain evolved 500 million years ago, and it controls our automatic functions, our breathing, our heartbeat, our body temperature. The thing about our reptilian brain is this does not think, it acts, it keeps us alive, okay? And that is, like we said, our brain stem back here. Next is our limbic brain. So the center here, this yellow and red and green pieces here. The limbic brain is our emotional brain. This links our emotions, our behaviors, and our cognition. The limbic brain allows us to learn from our experiences. It manages our emotions, and it helps us remember information and move things from our short-term to our long-term memory. This is also the part of our brain that controls our amygdala and our flight or flight response. Finally is the neocortex. This is our rational part of our brain. And this evolved about 3 to 4 million years ago. And this controls the executive functioning, our planning, abstract thinking, organization skills, self-regulation, imagination. The neocortex is the gray, lumpy part of the brain that does all the magical things that we're still trying to understand. It has endless capacity to learn for your entire lifetime. That's why we talk about neuroplasticity and being able to the brain's ability to rewire itself to learn new information. We are not old dogs who can't learn new tricks. We absolutely can learn throughout our entire life, and our brain needs to keep learning. And one of the most amazing things about the neocortex to me is thinking of newborn babies. There's over 3,000 languages spoke across the globe. And a newborn baby is able to, within days, start recognizing and wiring its brain to understand the specific language or languages that it's growing up on. So this neocortex is pretty impressive. Now, I mentioned the amygdala. That's this little green piece right here in the middle. So when we talk about amygdala hijacking or the fight, flight, freeze, or appease response, our amygdala, when it is triggered, it bypasses our neocortex. It cuts off our brain's ability to use its neocortex, its deeper level thinking, and automatically is working in the limbic and our emotional and instinctual brains. This is not a choice that we have. The amygdala is in control. So what we need to do and understand is that our amygdala can be triggered whether I am thinking about being attacked, or you are telling me a story about being attacked, or I'm actually being attacked. Our amygdala can be triggered with the exact same response in all of those situations, causing us to shut down. And we need to remember that when we're working with kids with trauma, because things that we think could be very innocent could be triggering them and cutting off their ability to use their rational brain. So as we think about bringing kids back and being in person, there's a lot we need to take into consideration, from not only how we are addressing students, how we are acting within the classroom, how others, the structures we're putting in place, but how are we setting up our classroom and arranging things? What areas are we making available? So as we talk about this, the two most recognizable impacts of trauma on students' education fall into two intertwining categories here. So the first is the impacts on academic performance. Along with what we have on the screen here, we also know that students with trauma are 2.5 times more likely to fail a grade level. They score lower on standardized tests. They're suspended and expelled at a higher rate, and they are designated for special education more frequently. I don't know how many times in my experience in the classroom, I had teachers asking me to work with students who didn't have an IEP or a 504, but just because they were a disruption to their class, which is a very sad reality. Now, the second category here is social impacts. So students who have experienced trauma tend to have a need for control. Sometimes we call it opposition defiant disorder, and school becomes a battleground for them. They've adopted coping mechanisms that are really frustrating to educators, and they're meant to evoke a reaction. They become a self-fulfilling prophecy when students experience trauma, and they expect adults to get angry and to yell at them. So they do things that evoke that response because that is the place where they naturally feel they are supposed to be. Children who are reactive, impulsive, and aggressive may mask their feelings of vulnerability with that strike first mentality. Seeing through the lens of their negative worldview, they often misinterpret classroom encounters and then overreact with confrontation and aggression. So I don't know how many times I saw this with my students, where a simple misunderstanding turned into a very big blow up of yelling and screaming and, you know, things getting knocked off of desks, simply because students expected a redirection to come with a much bigger negative consequence. So helping build those structures and those expectations in the classroom around, this is why we do things, and we're not just punishing people out of nowhere, but there's clear reasons on how we act and behave in the classroom. Though that's very important for these kids. And children who live in these unstable situations show a reduced capacity to learn and engage with a new school. When the household rules are subject to a parent's whim, that sequential order of a school is very difficult sometimes. So we need to keep that in mind. What we know is resilience is one of the most important skills a student can leave school with. So the single most common factor for this is having one stable, committed adult. I don't know how many of us have that one teacher we can look back on, but being that stable, committed adult that is there for a child, whether they're having a good day or a bad day, can make all the difference for them. So Perkins and Graham, in their research from 2012, talk about a trauma-informed teacher never forgets that students bring their entire lives into the classroom every day. And on some days, students will be in active trauma response. When teachers working with traumatized children understand the development pathways trauma affects, they can support resilience through these pathways. So when we talk about these pathways, the three big things we're looking at is how do we plan to handle trauma? How do we monitor our behavior? And how do we regulate ourselves when we're actively having these high emotional, or we see over here, these fearful situations? So students with a high number of ACEs have lived in a negative stress cycle for much of their life. That's what has brought them to this. A trusted adult helps build the student's capacity for this, trust and resiliency. So there are three critical pathways educators should support most, and they are a children's need for positive attachment. So just once again, welcoming students, greeting them with a kind wave and a hi by their name, helping them develop non-cognitive competencies. So being able to read the body language and interact with people and carry themselves in an appropriate manner, and a capacity for self-regulation. So trauma-informed teachers institute and maintain a daily routine that is consistent and predictable. They conduct daily check-ins and check-outs with all students, and they greet all students every time they come face-to-face to demonstrate how caring adults pay attention and care for children. By expressing unconditional positive regard, trauma-informed teachers help traumatized students develop positive attachment. And these students must be able to trust their teacher and school community to consistently care about and appreciate them, regardless of how well they perform in school. So I know this is things I saw with my students time and time again. And I actually had the privilege of having my kids for 3 years. So, well, depending on when they came in, but I would have them 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And then they would move out into middle school. But this really was huge because developing that trust is not an overnight process with these kids. For many of them, there's not an adult that's been there for them. And typically if there is an adult that's been there for them, they've quickly left. So having 3 years to build that relationship and for these kids to understand, even on their worst days when they may have destroyed the whole classroom and tipped over every desk and tore every bulletin board apart, and we showed up the next day and we sat down and we listened to how they were feeling then and what they did at night. And it takes time to build those relationships. So really understanding that there's no one activity that's going to fix it. And you could have 2 months of great days and then something could turn. So consistency is key. Routines are key, especially when it comes to discipline. So students understand that discipline is not just punitive, but it's to help them grow. So how are we approaching discipline and regulation of our emotions? So let's take a pause. We're a little over halfway through our time. Do we have any ahas, questions, thoughts? No? All right. So what we call our approach is being trauma ready. So when we talk about it, we want to think of it as actionable and transferable, and this quote gets at it. You want to be a lighthouse rather than a lifeboat. You can't be out all the time trying to quell the seas of others' emotions, but you need to help guide them to be able to self-regulate. So one of the biggest pieces that we can help our students, like I mentioned earlier, is developing a toolbox of strategies, things they can turn to help self-regulate. And we need to model these behaviors and show them how they can be used and implemented. So let's work on being lighthouses for our students. So some self-regulation strategies that you can bring in. First is always that we go back to focus on the breath. Meditation is being shown time and time again between thousands of years of study and now neuroscience and brain scans, that focusing on your breath is one of the best ways to help calm that amygdala's fight, flight, or freeze response. So what they have seen using fMRIs is that when you do a regular meditation practice, when you spend 5 minutes or a couple minutes throughout the day at different times, just focusing on your breath, feeling it rise and fall in your body, it helps your amygdala to be less triggered. So it helps you keep full access to your neocortex and your deeper level thinking. Identify a physical anchor. So sometimes we'll have a smooth stone or a sensory piece. I know one of my students had these 2 magnetic ball things that he liked to spin, and something that could help bring them physically into the moment and take their mind off of ruminating whatever their emotion is or their feeling, a physical anchor that they could take for 1, 2, 3 minutes and bring themselves back together. Because remember, as we think about this and looking at our brain, when we are in that high emotional state, we can't do higher level thinking. So these few minutes actually save us much more instructional time in the long run than trying to fight through a lesson with a student whose brain physically is not in the space to learn. So the last one is another technique called noting. So you note your thoughts or your feelings. So what this is, and this sort of goes back to in line with our breathing techniques, is just helping students identify, is this a thought I'm having, or is this a physical feeling, a physical sensation, a pain, an irritation, an itch? And then from there, noting whether it is a good, a bad, or a neutral thought or feeling. And then finally, what emotion it's causing in them. And once again, it's helping students talk about their emotions because it makes them more manageable. When we're able to identify and address the way we're feeling, then we can develop a plan. But if we're just saying we're angry and sitting in the corner stewing, we're never going to be able to help students develop a plan for that. So these are maybe 3 techniques that you could bring in to working with your students and making available to them. So in all this, being teachers, we know the classroom is the catalyst to change for these kids. It's a place where many amazing stories have come out of. And at MeTEOR, one of the things we do is work with classroom environments. So what we've seen is the environment is never neutral. The environment on the left and the environment on the right are the same class, but a whole level of different engagement. It's the same class, the same teacher, the approach changed. So they moved from isolated, independent work to collaborative team-based work. And this isn't just something that happened overnight, and especially when we're dealing with students with trauma, this definitely isn't something that just happens right away. But you can notice back here on the wall, part of what helped make this transition and helped build this collaborative team is having in place systems and structures that guide students' behaviors and that they can point to. So we have accountable team tasks. We're looking at purposeful language. So making sure students are able to have courteous conversations and modeling that for them and taking the time, not just to teach your lessons, but to start by teaching, hey, this is how we talk to each other. And here are some sentence stems and other pieces that can help these conversations. So what we've come up with at MeTEOR is called the pro-social learning ecosystem. And it's not meant to be one more thing, but it's really helping engage learners to prepare for the future and develop skills needed to be self-reliant adults. And there's 6 components to think about while you're designing your classroom environment, while you're setting it up as students are getting ready to come back, or when you're in, and I guess not or, but and as you look at your lesson design. So the first is learning at the core. And this sounds maybe on the nose, but as we're designing these spaces and these lessons, are they designed with a focus on student application? So not just practice work, but actually applying. And are we helping drive that through collaborative inquiry? Are we sparking curiosity with student-driven questions and real-world problems? And then thinking about how students will apply that information in ways that is not just a test or a worksheet, but something that is meaningful to them. And we know that that meaning helps these students with trauma come into their class and feel more at peace. Next is respectful collaboration. So what structures and systems are in place to support productive and courteous team conversations? As you saw in those pictures I put up previously, on the wall at each team space, the teacher had the specific setups and expectations right there. So she didn't always need to come over and redirect students and guide behaviors, but the team was able to manage themselves because they had the expectations there to reference and they were part of creating those. And that leads into safety and wellness. Does the environment promote well-being, resiliency, and wholeness of students? Is there a caring culture, and how are we respecting the uniqueness of each learner? We know that not all students can get from A to Z along the same path. So looking at, are we offering different ways that students can access information? Are we looking at different ways that teams are able to work together and show that they have learned a concept? Are we embracing different cultures and tying that into our classroom as a whole? And finally, with all of this, it creates an ownership and responsibility for learning. So are we creating students who have efficacy, perseverance, and are using their voice in their learning? Are they expressing when they need support? Are they helping their classmates come along? We know that ownership and learning is what is going to help propel students forward into all these new careers as they are moving from different career to different career, having to continually be learners. Think about everything that you all have had to learn in the past 12 to 18 months to continue doing the work you're doing. And that is now only going to increase for these students. So creating that responsibility for learning is key. So as we talk about trauma-informed design, Fry, Fisher, and Smith have a great article, Trauma-Informed Design in the Classroom, that came out last year. And they looked at 3 principles, which is to realize, recognize, and respond. So no, we need to realize how the physical environment affects an individual's sense of identity, worth, dignity, and empowerment. So think about any spaces you may have been. Do we enjoy an office full of cubicles or an office space that's a little more open with plants and flowers and those type of things around? Do we enjoy a drab tan doctor's office or a nice open glass building that looks out onto a bit of a park. Spaces have a huge effect on us. We need to recognize that the physical environment has an impact on our attitude, mood, and behavior, and that there's a strong link between our physiological state, emotional state, and physical environment. Who gets nervous going to the dentist's office, right? There is specific things that we know. I think about growing up back in Ohio, walking in the fall, and you have that sort of cool, warm Midwest air that hits you. There's just things that create a response in us, and we want our classroom to be that safe space for kids. So how do we respond? By designing and maintaining supportive and healing environments for students who are facing trauma. So this looks like creating a calming or den or a quiet area. Is there a way, and I know in classrooms, especially in California, we don't have a lot of space, but is there a way that you can even have a chair or a pillow or a soft space that kids can know it's okay to choose to go to when they need to and take a couple of minutes to recenter themselves? As you're setting up your room, position students so they don't have their backs to the door, as many as you can. So one of the things that we don't think about is students who have experienced trauma are hyper vigilant, and they spend much more time monitoring windows and doorways. How many of us just instinctually, when we go to a restaurant, sit with our back to the wall so that we can see the rest of the restaurant? Well, think about students who have experienced these things regularly. I know this really hit home for a group of superintendents recently that I was talking with, because we were at a hotel conference room and we were talking about trauma and trauma-informed design and setting up classrooms and everything. And I said, think about what is one thing we notice that everybody is doing right at this moment that could really trigger a student who's experienced severe trauma? And it was 30 people and no one really had an idea, and it was they all had their backs to the door, and that is a huge one for some of these kids, is they need to be aware of where everyone is around them in their space. So with that as well, sit in each chair and at each workspace. Do you feel that you're part of the group and do you have proximity to your peers and resources? So making sure that we aren't just secluding kids who are having issues. I know that's tended to be the default is, oh, the kid with the most problems sits by themselves by the teachers, but we need these students to feel included and work with each other on how to best manage our emotions and work with others when they're having difficult times. So think about some of these as you're setting up your classroom now. So some of the things to think about as we get wrapped up here towards the end. How are you creating a warm and welcoming environment? What is your welcome policy, your greeting each day for the kids? Is there a sense of physical and social order? Is the room laid out in a way that kids can easily navigate? They know where things are supposed to be, what the expectations are, how they're meant to behave, and are there cues for students throughout the space? Are we creating a sense of ownership by the students? So one of the things that I really liked to do in my room was limit the amount of decorations that I put up, and it was for a couple of reasons. One being it was our space, the students and mine, and I wanted them to help choose what went on the walls and what was most important. So we had, we did have our directions and our cues on the walls, but we worked on creating our classroom norms together. So those didn't go up until we did that as a class. And then we let the students choose what work they wanted to showcase when they were done, what they were most proud of, not just picking the best the student who did the best piece in our minds, but letting the kids put that up. So it really helped create that sense of ownership, and truly in a population of students who one of their first go-to ways of letting out frustration was to go and destroy work, the things on the walls when it's their own stuff. That really helped limit how many times kids tore up the bulletin boards. So sending positive messages. How do we just show and teach kids to pay it forward? Minimize opportunities to have out of sight activities. That's always a big one. How do we make sure that we're able to keep a clear lines of sight throughout the classroom and not putting up boundaries and walls, but also creating those calming areas? Are you hearing more student discourse? One of the things I'm always pushing teachers towards is if we're able to engage students in meaningful conversations, you really are going to see a lot less of the off-task behavior. So not just explain the answer to your partner, but really having them partner coach, having them take each other through a problem, or coming up with a question to investigate around the chapter, but making that student talk very meaningful. And back again to the systems and structures that are there as reminders to build that security for kids that they don't have outside of the classroom. So one last activity that the kids always really liked was the dragon breath. So this one I normally would, so what we do here, this is real big. Sometimes they call these lion roars, but real big, deep breaths. And then pushing it out with all of your might. So even with my kids, this is sometimes we would go outside because there would be a little bit of a yell that even went with these when we were doing our dragon breaths. But it's truly is a great way to sort of release all of that negativity that's building up. Now this isn't just screaming our heads off to scream, but it's big, deep breaths and then pushing it out. And one of the keys when you're doing these deep breaths is you want to breathe out longer than you were breathing in. So say you breathe in for a count of 3, you want to breathe out for a count of 4 or a count of 5. And that breathing technique is shown to help calm and cool your body down. So one of the things I do want to point out too is when students are in a very active, high state of trauma and their amygdala is going off and they're in that fight, flight, or freeze, that cool down period is not immediate. It's not like, oh, okay, our amygdala is shut off and we're back to normal. Your body has been pumping out those stress hormones. You're really up and amps. You're just ready to go. And they have found that it takes roughly 20 minutes for your body to get fully back down and decompressed. So helping students, as we said, monitor themselves and have a toolkit of self-regulation strategies that can catch this before we're in a full-blown fight, flight, or freeze mode will really help us bring students back around sooner. When they get to that full meltdown, they're going to need at least 20 minutes once they finally tried to calm down to get fully back to normal. So really taking the time to upfront teach those strategies, build those mechanisms into your classroom is going to save time down the road of time off task and everything as we're bringing students back. Okay. So finally, our ahas or questions for this morning's session. As we are closing in, we've got about just a few minutes left here and only a couple slides. So any ahas, questions, takeaways from this morning? Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I do want to share, we have worked with the USC Rossier School of Education to create a 3-part trauma readiness certification. Levels 1 and level 2 trauma aware and trauma skilled are for classroom teachers. These are CEU courses that you can enroll in. Each course is 7:45 to 1 hour lectures, like online classes that you go through at your own pace. So they're each about 7 hours. Like I said, 1 and 2 are for teachers. 3 is for site administrators and district administrators. So if you are interested in going much deeper on trauma readiness, trauma awareness, you can check that out. And I appreciate everybody joining us this morning. I hope you are walking away feeling confident that you can start being routinely aware and highly aware of how to support these students. So thank you so very much. Hopefully we'll be doing this next summer in person, maybe. I don't know if that's the thing or not, but please reach out to me, bwimmer@meteoreducation.com, if you have questions or want to know more about the T3 course. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Taylor, I think.
Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, everybody, I'm wishing you a happy Monday and a great week. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll send out a copy of this video recording and your PowerPoint presentations to everybody later on today.
Thank you very much. Have a good one. And thank you for all the work you're doing for our students, everyone. Bye.